Hey, what's up? Welcome back to your channel name. This time, we're going to dive into a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely. It all started with a long drive through winding mountain roads, deep in rural Vermont. Nathan Rivers, a final-year college student from Boston, was looking for a quiet place to finish his thesis. But not just any thesis, he was writing about the dark, forgotten histories of small American towns. That's when he came across a nearly unreadable reference to a place called Black Hollow. A name so obscure it barely showed up on maps. He drove for hours in his beat-up old sedan, passing miles of pine forests cloaked in creeping fog. The deeper he got into the woods, the heavier the air felt. Eventually, the road narrowed into gravel, then dirt. There were no gas stations. No lights. Just trees, wind, and silence. When he finally reached the village, it was like stepping into a forgotten century. Wooden houses leaned with age, some nearly swallowed by overgrown yards. The sky was gray, even though it was only late afternoon. Fog hung low, like something alive. And the few people he passed on the street barely looked at him, some turned away completely. But Nathan didn't care. He wasn't here for company. He was here for silence, for mystery. And he'd already booked a suspiciously cheap rental house on the outskirts of the village. The house stood near the edge of the woods, shadowed by crooked old maple trees. It looked like something out of a black and white photograph, chipped white paint, narrow windows covered in grime, a rotting porch with one step sagging like a broken tooth. 2 stories. A small attic window. A sagging chimney. It didn't scream comfort, but it screamed story. And that was good enough for Nathan. What really stood out was the price. It was absurdly low. Even for a remote village in Vermont, it didn't make sense. A house like that should have cost hundreds more per month. Nathan figured maybe the locals just didn't want to live so far from town. Or maybe they were scared of something. He shrugged off the unease, grabbed his backpack, and stepped up onto the creaking porch. As soon as his foot touched the wood, something about the air changed. Like the house had inhaled. Still, he turned the key, opened the door, and crossed the threshold into what would become his worst mistake. The owner was already inside. Mr. Harlan. A gaunt, gray-haired man with deep-set eyes and a wool coat that looked older than the house. He didn't smile. Didn't make small talk. Just held out a large brass key and said very little. He gave a few notes about the house, where the breakers were, how to work the old heater, but there was one thing he repeated. Just one. He said not to open the attic at night. No explanation. No reason. Just a cold, final warning that left a bitter taste in the air. Then he turned and walked out the front door. No goodbye. No handshake. Just the sound of boots fading down the gravel path, until he vanished into the fog. Nathan stood in the middle of the empty living room, surrounded by dust motes swirling in the gray afternoon light. He should have felt excited. But something was wrong. The house didn't just feel empty. It felt, watching. That first night, the silence was deafening. No cars. No streetlights. Just the wind, the trees, and the occasional creak of old wood shifting with the cold. Nathan tried to sleep early, exhausted from the long trip. But just after 2 a.m., he woke up. Footsteps. Not just creaking. Actual, deliberate footsteps. Slow, measured, moving across the attic floor. Directly above his room. He froze in bed, heart thumping. He knew the attic door was locked tight. He hadn't touched it. But the sound, it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was up there, pacing slowly. He waited, barely breathing, thinking maybe it was just the house settling. But the steps didn't fade. They moved. Paused. Then started again, right above his head. Nathan didn't dare check. Not that night. He just laid there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had just imagined it. But the look in Mr. Harlan's eyes when he mentioned the attic came back to him, and sleep never returned that night. The next morning, he tried to shake it off. Told himself it was probably just the wind or his imagination playing tricks after a long day. But then someone knocked at the door. It was a woman. Early 30s, with a warm smile and a basket in her arms. Her name was Emma Lee, and she lived across the dirt road. She said she liked to welcome new faces, though Nathan had a feeling there weren't many of those in Black Hollow. She handed him a pie, homemade, still warm. Her voice was kind, but her eyes kept darting to the house. Especially to the attic window, like she didn't want to look too long. There was something in her tone. A caution she wasn't saying out loud. Before she left, she hesitated at the porch steps. Then, in a voice softer than before, she said he shouldn't stay too long in that house. That it had a long history. And just like that, she was gone. Nathan stood in the doorway, holding the pie, wondering what she meant. Long history? What kind of history? But deep down, he knew. That wasn't just a neighborly visit. That was a warning. Nathan spent most of the morning exploring the house. He brought in his bags, set up his workspace near the front window, and took a mental inventory of each creaking floorboard. It was the kind of house that whispered when no one was speaking, groans in the walls, soft knocks without a source. Still, he chalked it up to age and weather. While cleaning the upstairs hallway, he noticed something odd. A section of wallpaper near the attic hatch had started peeling off. It looked like time had gotten the better of the glue, but as he tugged it loose, he saw something underneath. Symbols. Carved directly into the wood. Faint, shallow marks arranged in a circle, with jagged shapes branching from the center. They weren't decorative, and definitely not part of any construction code. Nathan had studied enough history to know they looked old, almost ritualistic. But he couldn't place them. They weren't Latin. Not Celtic. Something older. He took a few photos and planned to research them later, but the air around that spot felt colder. Not like a draft, but like standing near something that shouldn't be touched. Still, curiosity pushed him forward. That was Nathan's problem, he didn't know when to stop digging. That afternoon, while Nathan was outside throwing away a pile of old newspapers he'd found in the basement, a local passed by with a black lab on a leash. The dog looked healthy and strong, but the moment it caught sight of the house, it froze. Its hackles went up. It growled low, eyes locked on the porch. The man tugged at the leash, but the dog refused to move. Then it whimpered, pulled back, and started barking at something only it could see. The man gave Nathan a tight-lipped nod but didn't say a word. Just kept pulling the dog until it finally turned away. But the dog never stopped looking over its shoulder, not until they were completely out of sight. Nathan stood there, holding a crumpled newspaper in one hand, thinking maybe the house wasn't the only one hiding something. If even animals wanted nothing to do with it, what did they sense that he didn't? Later that day, Nathan decided to explore the basement. He brought a flashlight, knowing the old bulbs barely worked. The basement stairs groaned under his weight, and each step stirred up the smell of damp wood and mold. The space was cluttered, old furniture, boxes, rusted tools, but one thing caught his eye immediately. In the far corner, almost hidden beneath a sheet, was a trunk. An old one. Heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands, and covered in thick layers of dust. He tried opening it, but the lock was still intact. Not modern, though, this was a keyhole lock, the kind you'd see in museums. A family heirloom, maybe. Or something forgotten on purpose. Nathan didn't have the key, but something about the trunk unsettled him. He crouched beside it for a while, just staring. He had no idea what was inside, but his gut told him the house was keeping secrets. And some things didn't want to be found. As night fell, Nathan returned upstairs, exhausted but restless. The temperature in the house dropped faster than expected, and he wrapped himself in a blanket, trying to focus on his thesis notes. But the quiet didn't last long. It began with a faint static sound, like a radio out of frequency, coming from the old vent near the ceiling. He thought maybe the furnace was kicking on. But then it shifted. The static turned into murmurs. Low, hushed voices. Too soft to understand, but unmistakably human. He stood under the vent, listening, frozen. The whispering didn't stop. It moved between vents. One moment overhead, the next from across the room. Like voices traveling through hollow bones inside the walls. There was no one else in the house. No TV. No neighbors close enough to hear through the walls. And yet, the house was talking. Or something inside it was. Unable to sleep, Nathan wandered the house again, hoping to shake the feeling of being watched. He ended up in the master bedroom, the only room he hadn't touched yet. It smelled stale, like dust and lavender, and the mirror above the dresser was cracked in the corner. Out of habit, he wiped the mirror clean, and that's when it shifted slightly. Just enough to see something tucked behind it. He pulled the mirror away from the wall and found an old photograph wedged between the boards. Black and white. Faded at the edges. It showed a family standing on the porch of this very house. 2 adults. 1 child. But their faces were off. Blurred, not from the camera, but something stranger. Their outlines looked smudged, almost like they were moving, or melting. The little girl in the photo was staring straight at the lens. Eyes wide. Expression unreadable. Nathan flipped it over. There was a date scrawled in ink, October 13, 1913. No names. No message. Just a whisper of the past. He returned the photo to the drawer, but sleep never came that night. The attic door creaked around 3 a.m., and for the first time, he heard something breathing behind it. By the time sunlight crept through the dusty blinds, Nathan had barely slept. He finally dozed off just before dawn, heart still racing from the sounds upstairs. When he woke around 8, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The air felt still. Like the house was holding its breath. As he stepped into the hallway, his blood ran cold. The attic door at the end of the hall, the one that had been locked since day one, was slightly ajar. Just an inch or two. Just enough to see darkness beyond the frame. Nathan hadn't touched it. He didn't even have the key. He stared at the door, unable to move for several seconds, trying to rationalize. Maybe the lock was old, faulty. Maybe the wind. But there was no wind. The windows were closed. And if it had simply swung open, he would have heard it. But he hadn't. He walked past the door slowly, resisting the urge to peek inside. Whatever opened it hadn't wanted to be found. Not yet. That day, Nathan finally gave in to the weight of the unease settling in his chest. He dug out an old notebook from his bag, something he usually used for quick thoughts or field notes, and began writing everything down. The whispers. The attic footsteps. The photograph. The trunk in the basement. The dog. He didn't write for anyone else, just himself. He figured if he was going to lose his mind in this place, at least he'd leave a trail. Maybe someone else would find it, someday. Maybe they'd understand. But as he flipped through the pages, preparing to write, something strange happened. The pen in his hand began to tremble. Not from fear, but from something else. A shiver in the air, like static on skin. Still, he wrote. Word by word. And as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't writing alone. Later in the afternoon, he finally worked up the courage to check the attic door. It was still ajar, just as he left it in the morning. He brought a flashlight, took a deep breath, and pushed the door fully open. The wooden stairs creaked with each step as he climbed. Dust swirled in the beam of his light, and the air was dry, stale with decades of abandonment. But what stopped him wasn't what was in the attic. It was what was on the door. Scratch marks. Deep ones. Dozens of them, carved into the inside of the attic door. Like someone had clawed at it from within. Not just random scratches either, there were patterns. Circles. Repeating symbols. Like the ones he found under the wallpaper. The realization sank deep. Whatever had been in that attic hadn't wanted to stay there. It had tried, maybe for years, to get out. And now, it had. By evening, Nathan had had enough. His instincts were screaming at him to go. The dreams, the sounds, the marks, it wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real. Something was in that house. He packed his bag quickly, grabbed his keys, and ran to the car. But when he turned the ignition, the engine just clicked. Again. And again. Dead. He popped the hood, checked the battery, everything looked normal. No obvious damage. But the engine wouldn't even try to turn over. Like something was draining it. He tried calling for help. No signal. Not even a single bar. His phone was full of battery, but it felt cold in his hand. He tried walking up the road, but the deeper he went into the woods, the thicker the fog became. Like a curtain refusing to open. Something didn't want him to leave. Not yet. Nathan stayed up all night. He kept every light on in the house. Sat in the living room with a kitchen knife on the table and his journal in his lap. His heart beat like a drum, echoing in the silence. Around 3 a.m., he stood near the window and looked out toward the forest. The trees were still, barely moving. Fog hung low, covering the ground like a blanket. But something in the corner of his eye drew his attention upward. To the attic window. And there, just behind the cracked glass, stood a figure. Not clear. Not detailed. Just a tall, still shadow, its head slightly tilted, as if watching him. No movement. No sound. Just presence. He blinked. Looked again. It was gone. But he knew what he saw. And worse, he knew the house wasn't empty anymore. By the next morning, Nathan was done pretending everything was fine. He needed answers. Real ones. So he returned to the basement, where he'd seen stacks of old junk piled in a rusted filing cabinet near the back wall. Most of it was useless, receipts, manuals, water-stained bills. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a folder of yellowed paper, he found what he hadn't expected, a bundle of newspaper clippings, brittle with age, bound together with twine. He laid them out on the table upstairs, smoothing each page carefully. And slowly, the house's story began to reveal itself. A fire. A missing child. A family that vanished in the winter of 1914. Then decades of silence, until the property changed hands again and again, each owner staying less than a year. One was committed. Another was never found. All of them had one thing in common, they left with their minds broken or their lives destroyed. The house had a name, it turned out. Locals called it the Hollowing. That evening, while Nathan made coffee in a desperate attempt to stay awake, he noticed a shift in the air. The kitchen had grown stuffy. Thick. Not warm, but dense, like standing in a sealed room. Then the smell hit him. Smoke. Not cigarette smoke. Not burning wood. This was old. Acrid. Like the aftermath of a house fire. It came in waves, seeping through the air vents, curling under doorways. Nathan raced to the furnace, thinking something was burning, but it was fine, cold, even. He opened the windows, but the smoke smell didn't go away. It clung to his clothes. His skin. It was inside the walls, inside the vents, like the house was reliving something it couldn't forget. And for a split second, as he passed the mirror in the hall, he swore he saw flames behind him. That night, Nathan fell into the deepest sleep he'd had in days. Not restful, trapped. The dream began in the attic. He was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by old toys, dusty dolls, wooden blocks, a rocking horse that moved on its own. The room was bathed in a strange, gray light, and at the far corner stood the little girl from the photograph. She wore a white dress, stained at the hem. Her eyes were wide, black, hollow. She didn't blink. She raised one hand slowly and pointed at Nathan, then at the wall. Suddenly the attic burst into flames, silent, roaring fire that didn't burn but consumed. Nathan tried to run, but the door was gone. And the girl just watched, unmoving, even as the floor cracked beneath her feet. He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, with the taste of ash on his tongue. Nathan didn't waste time. As soon as the dream faded and daylight crept into the room, he climbed to the attic again. This time, he wasn't just looking, he had a mission. A direction. He went straight to the wall the girl pointed to in the dream. The far side, behind a shelf of broken furniture. The wallpaper there was different, newer. Cheap. A quick cover-up. He tore it down with shaking hands, exposing the wooden panels beneath. And there, carved into the grain, was a single word, stay. Just below it, the wood looked different. Hollow. Nathan grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. Inside was a small crawlspace, and something wrapped in rotting linen. He backed away instantly, the air shifting again, colder, heavier. He didn't open the bundle. Not yet. But whatever was in that wall had been waiting a very long time. By evening, Nathan couldn't stop glancing at the wall. He'd closed the crawlspace, but he knew it wasn't sealed. Something was still in there. Watching. Listening. Then he noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, metallic, earthy. Then stronger. He returned to the attic and saw the crawlspace door trembling slightly, as if breathing. A dark, tar-like liquid had begun to seep from the edges, pooling on the floorboards. It wasn't water. It was thicker. He knelt down and touched it, instantly regretting it. His fingers went numb, as if the liquid was colder than ice. He wiped it off, but the sensation lingered. The stain grew wider, spreading across the attic floor like a shadow that couldn't be cleaned. Nathan didn't sleep that night. The smell of death hung in the house. And from the attic, he heard something moving again. This time, it sounded like crawling. Nathan had always been grounded. Sharp. But over the next few days, time started slipping through his fingers like sand. He would sit down to write in his journal and suddenly realize it was night. He'd blink and entire hours would vanish. Once, he woke up in the bathtub fully clothed, water filled to the brim, ice cold, though he didn't remember getting in. Another time, he came to in the attic, crouched beside the crawlspace, nails broken and fingertips bloody, as if he'd been clawing at the wall. But worst of all were the moments when he found his own handwriting in the journal, pages filled with words he didn't remember writing. Whole passages. Scribbled prayers. Names he'd never heard. Symbols he'd never drawn. Something was inside his head, pulling the strings. Desperate for answers, Nathan tore through every room, searching for anything the house might have buried. In the upstairs bedroom, the one with peeling wallpaper and cold drafts, he noticed a loose floorboard near the window. Beneath it, wrapped in aged canvas, was a diary. Leather-bound, cracked with time. The name inside the cover was faded, but still legible, Clara Whitmore. The entries dated back to 1913. They started ordinary, descriptions of days spent in the house, mentions of a strict father and a sickly mother. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. Darker. Clara began describing dreams. Voices in the attic. A man with no face standing in her doorway. In the final entry, she wrote about a game she was told to play. A ritual. Something about trading places with the hollow ones. Nathan didn't sleep that night. He left the diary open on the table, unable to close it. The pages had a heartbeat. It started with the bathroom mirror. Nathan passed by it in a rush, but caught something strange in the reflection, something behind him that shouldn't have been there. A woman, standing still, her mouth open in a silent scream. But when he turned around, the hallway was empty. He chalked it up to exhaustion. But then it happened again. And again. The mirrors throughout the house, above the fireplace, in the closet door, in the bedroom, they began to show scenes that weren't real. Not yet. One showed the house in flames, walls blackened and falling inward. Another showed Nathan himself, standing in the attic, face pale and eyes black like empty wells. Worse, sometimes the mirrors didn't reflect him at all. They reflected someone else standing where he should have been. Late at night, when the house fell into stillness, Nathan began hearing whispers, not in his head, but in the walls. They came through the heating vents, soft at first, like distant echoes from underground. At first it was just static. Then fragmented words. Then full sentences, as if someone was crawling through the ducts, speaking directly into his ear. The voices weren't human. They were too flat. Too calm. They spoke in riddles. In Clara's voice. In his own voice. One night, he leaned close to the vent near his bed, listening. And the whisper said, "Trade is complete. Stay in the hollow." His blood turned to ice. He covered every vent with blankets and tape, but the voices still came. They no longer needed the vents. They were in the rooms. In the shadows. Right behind him. The smell returned, stronger than ever. Sweet, rotten, clinging to everything. It dragged Nathan down to the basement again, to the dark, humid corner near the old coal chute where the floor always felt just a bit too soft. The dirt shifted easily beneath his hands, almost like it wanted to be disturbed. He dug for what felt like an hour, until his fingers scraped burlap. Another bundle. Wrapped tighter than the first. No rot. No signs of time touching it. Almost fresh. He didn't open it. Not yet. He carried it to the main floor, heart pounding, and placed it beside the first bundle from the attic. For the rest of the night, he kept watch. By candlelight, both bundles began to bleed. With the bundles placed side by side and the whispers growing louder, Nathan knew he couldn't keep reacting. He had to understand what he was dealing with. The name, Clara Whitmore, led him to a small historical archive online, buried in a forgotten blog about old New England folklore. There, buried in scanned pages from a 19th-century occult ledger, Nathan found it, a ritual once practiced in secret by rural families during long winters. They called it the hollow trade. The process involved making an offering to the spirits trapped between life and death, an exchange of presents. A body for a ghost. A soul for silence. The ritual required three things: a willing occupant, a sealed house, and remembrance of the forgotten. Nathan realized he had unwittingly fulfilled all three. Nathan had seen them before, the dusty old frames hung along the staircase. Pictures of strangers, faded and formal, long dead. He'd ignored them for days. But now, as he passed by with the weight of the ritual in his mind, he stopped. Something was wrong. One of the photos was different. It was clearer, newer. The man in the picture looked familiar. Clean-shaven, dark hair, flannel shirt. It was him. Nathan stared in horror. He didn't remember posing for it. But there it was, his face, staring blankly forward in sepia tones, eyes empty. He checked the frame beside it and saw the little girl. Clara. Her expression hadn't changed, but now she was smiling. By the end of the day, more of the photos had changed. By nightfall, every single one featured him. The landline in the kitchen had never worked. It was an old rotary phone, dusty, tangled in a dead cord. He never paid it any attention, until it rang. Once. Twice. Echoing through the silent house. Nathan picked it up without thinking, pressing the receiver to his ear. But there was no static. No robotic buzz. Instead, he heard his own voice. Panicked. Crying. Screaming. It was him, but not from now. It sounded like he was underground, or drowning, or trapped behind walls. The voice begged to be let out. Screamed about fire. About Clara. About something called the mirror door. Then it went silent. He yanked the cord from the wall, but the phone kept ringing. Nathan had started avoiding them. The two bundles he'd uncovered, one from the attic, one from the basement, he kept them in the living room under a salt circle, half out of fear, half out of desperate hope it might actually do something. But on the third night, he heard them dragging. Slow, cloth-scraping floor sounds. When he entered the room, they were gone. The salt was scattered. One bundle now sat at the top of the stairs. The other, directly outside his bedroom door. He didn't sleep. The next morning, they were both back in the living room, right where they started. But now the cloth was damp with black stains and something inside them was breathing. At dawn, driven by a strange pull, Nathan returned to the largest mirror in the house, the antique one on the second-floor landing. It had always unsettled him. Always gave back a reflection that felt a few seconds too slow. This time, when he stood before it, he noticed something impossible: his reflection was gone. In its place was Clara. She stood still, behind the glass, her hand pressed to the other side. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, her hand slowly pointed down, and a line appeared in the mirror, etched like a crack but deliberate, forming the shape of a door. Nathan touched the mirror. Cold. Then warm. And when he pressed his palm to the same spot she had, the glass began to give. Like skin. Like breath. The house didn't want him to leave. It wanted him to step through. When Nathan pressed against the glass, it didn't shatter. It yielded, like a membrane stretched too thin. He slipped through with a shudder, the air on the other side immediately colder, thicker. And silent. He stood in what looked like the exact same hallway. Same wallpaper. Same dusty floors. But the colors were wrong, bleached, drained of warmth, like the world had been soaked in ash water. The air smelled of old iron and wet soil. Every light flickered, as if it resented being on. He called out, but no sound echoed. And that's when he realized, this was a reflection of the house. An inverted copy. Except this version was filled with things that shouldn't be moving, shadows that crawled along ceilings, doors that opened on their own, and whispers that came not from the walls, but from beneath the floorboards. Nathan wandered through the reflection, trying to understand how deep it went. But time bent unnaturally here. One moment, the sun shone weakly through stained windows. The next, night had swallowed everything whole. His watch spun uncontrollably. The clocks in the house ticked backward, forward, then stopped altogether. He looked in a hallway mirror, its reflection was of a man years older, gaunt, eyes haunted. Then it flickered, and the man wasn't him anymore. In one room, he found a birthday cake, half melted, covered in wax, with his name written in cursive frosting. The date was 3 years in the future. He was beginning to lose the sense of now. In the nursery, faded and mold-stained, Nathan found a vision playing out like a looping film. Clara sat on the rocking chair, humming to a doll with no face. Her lips moved, repeating the same words silently. Then the room flickered, and she stood screaming. Nails bloodied from scratching the walls. Skin pale, shaking, eyes wide with terror. He couldn't hear her voice, but her mouth kept forming one phrase. Trade me. Trade me. Trade me. And then, she smiled. Slowly. Sweetly. Everything around her faded. The rocking chair began moving by itself. And the doll turned its head toward Nathan. That was when he realized, she'd done the ritual willingly. Not as a victim, but as part of the deal. He stumbled into a room that didn't exist in the real house. A hidden parlor, soaked in mildew and candle wax. In the center lay a third bundle, perfectly wrapped, tied with crimson ribbon, resting on a child's mattress. Unlike the other two, this one pulsed gently. He touched it, and it was warm, alive. For a moment, he thought he heard breathing from within. He leaned close and the bundle whispered his name, in his own voice. This wasn't an offering. This was a replacement. One meant to take his place in the real world, while he stayed in the hollow. Panic surged through him. He turned, sprinting back through the hallways, retracing every step, trying to find the mirror he'd come through. But it was gone. Not broken. Not hidden. Just, never there. The walls were seamless. The glass he'd passed through no longer existed. He pounded the spot, screamed silently, begged for light. But the house didn't respond. Instead, it flickered once, just once, and now the shadows were watching him openly. He wasn't the first here. He wouldn't be the last. And somewhere in the real world, his reflection smiled back. In the hollow world's attic, Nathan found a small wooden chest, locked with brittle wire. It was familiar. Too familiar. He broke it open and froze. Inside was his journal, the exact one he'd been writing in back in the real house. Every page was filled. His handwriting. His thoughts. His fears. Only, the last entry was dated 2 weeks into the future. It detailed how he had adjusted to the trade, how he now understood the role of the Hollow Keeper, and how new tenants will arrive soon. The final line chilled him. Clara watches from the walls now. I hear her lullaby when I sleep. She forgives me. Nathan didn't write that. Not yet. Back in the real world, Nathan's reflection, the one now walking in his body, seemed to resume life as if nothing had happened. Neighbors waved to him. He responded with smiles. He went grocery shopping. Paid bills. Watered plants. But there was something wrong. His eyes were too still. Movement slightly delayed, like someone copying life from memory. Late at night, he would stare into mirrors for hours. And sometimes, if the light was just right, the reflection lagged behind. That version of Nathan wasn't alone inside the body. Back in the hollow, time had collapsed. Nathan wandered between rooms that changed shape when he blinked. He no longer needed food, or sleep. But he felt something pulling at his mind, soft, cold tendrils urging him to give in. Then Clara appeared again. This time she wasn't screaming. She was calm. Still. She brought him to the nursery. Showed him a mirror, newly formed. Inside it, a new person appeared, a young woman, carrying a suitcase, stepping onto the porch of Black Hollow House. Clara leaned in and whispered without speaking. You can return, if you bring someone to replace you. The trade wasn't a one-time deal. It was a cycle. Nathan tried to resist. Tried to scream. Tried to break the mirror. But the house wanted this. It welcomed repetition. It fed on it. Soon, he found himself acting without thinking, tidying up rooms, removing certain symbols, straightening photos, folding blankets. Clara watched from every corner, her doll always in her arms. In the nursery, the third bundle was gone. And in the fireplace, a single postcard appeared, signed by Nathan, welcoming the next tenant to their peaceful mountain retreat. It was written in his handwriting. He didn't remember writing it. But he didn't stop it either. In the final scene of episode 1, a car pulls into the gravel driveway under a gray sky. A new voice narrates softly, a woman named Emily, eager for a break, a fresh start, and maybe a few quiet nights alone. She finds the key under the flower pot. The door creaks open. Inside, the house is spotless. Quiet. Almost too quiet. And in the hallway, one of the old photographs seems to shift slightly as she passes, adjusting, shaping, beginning again. Somewhere, deep in the walls, a whisper stirs. Welcome to Black Hollow. Cut to black. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.